You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you.
Hello, nice to be with you. Thanks for joining us. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan, and it is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Let's get right to it. What I wanted to talk about today is three categories of people and how to talk to folks within each category and across different categories. And listen, I know in the past I've talked a lot about avoiding generalizing because a lot of mischaracterizations go along with generalizing. But there are, in fact, distinctions. And we can, for the purposes of at least this conversation, put folks in buckets. Sarah Isker likes to use buckets. So we'll put in big buckets of people. And even the way to describe these broad categories or these buckets, if you will, of people is insufficient because talking about the left and the right, it doesn't really capture it doesn't capture sociologically the accurate descriptions of where people are, where they're getting their news and analysis, the friends and locales, the accurate descriptions of these broad categories of people. But for the purpose of this conversation, what I'm talking about is the committed partisan right, the progressive partisan left, and then this broad category that, for lack of a better description, we'll just put in the middle. Now, generally speaking, based on actual election results, based on polls that were done at the elections, and we could have an entire year's worth of conversations on polls. I'm not going to get into that today, but safe to say that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about polls, mostly based on user error, not knowing how to use polls, not knowing how to read polls, starting just with factoring in margins of error. So that's a different conversation. But the fact is that going back to our broad buckets of people, the committed partisan right consists of about 28% of our friends, neighbors, and relatives. The progressive partisan left is about 27 or 28%. So that means about 43% of us, including me, are neither partisan right nor progressive, committed partisan right nor progressive partisan left. Now, it's a broad coalition of 43%. And it's really diverse. What makes up that middle? It's not folks that a lot of folks identify as independent. Again, these are based on actual voter rolls, and I understand within folks who write "I" next to their name instead of Democrat or Republican. I understand that there's a large number of those folks who lean right or lean left and generally vote Republican and generally vote Democrat. But that even if you look at leaners, it still leaves a pretty significant chunk of folks who truly are independent. But if you're taking the larger number, the 43% number, that's made up of people who are exhausted, people who are uncommitted, people who are disengaged, and then people who are truly independent. So again, I know plenty of folks, and this is what, if you look at purple states, if you look at purple districts, those are the folks that upon which elections turn. So I get into conversations with a lot of different people, and everyone, including me, has a tendency to be myopic, meaning you see the world through your own worldview. You have biases that confirm your own positions and prejudices and preferences. So you're going to say, oh, well, not that many people really believe this. Not that many people really believe that. And a majority of the conversations I have are either with committed people on the committed left, progressive left, or the committed partisan right. So a lot of folks will say, no, there's not really truly independence. Well, there are, because 2016 went one way, presidential line of the ballot. 2020 went another way. 2024 went another way. And you look at the 7 states, but I think that those states are going to vary from one election to the next. But generally speaking, purple states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, you could put kind of North Carolina in there. There's any number of states, depending on the year, depending on the election. There are truly swing states and also truly swing districts, like the one that I'm in. There might not be a ton of them, but there are still about 20 or so swing districts. And it's based on people like me, people that will vote one way at the top of the ticket for a different party somewhere down the line for state and local officials. And candidly, there's a lot of folks that can be persuaded from one election to the next, even from a midterm to from 2026 to 2028. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. But for our purposes, for what we're doing, talking politics and religion without killing each other, there's something that's really been frustrating me. And that is a person who is undecided, whether it's generally speaking or on an individual issue, will get labeled by someone else that they're engaged in a conversation with based on a position that they begin to articulate but can't fully express because they get cut off. It's happened to me many times. I'll give you an example. My cousins from Israel are visiting, and I keep in touch with my cousins from Israel on a regular basis. I try to stay relatively informed. So when I get in conversations, when any number of things might happen, like a month or so ago when Israel bombed Iran, I was at a breakfast that morning. I hadn't even had time to digest the news. I hadn't had time to talk to my cousins in Israel about what happened. But there were two, I think three, all three guys were there by the time well, no. There were two guys were there. A third was on the way. They're all, they all voted for Trump in the last election. So my impression was they read the headline and they knew exactly how they were going to feel right out of the gate. Didn't dive into it, but one guy in particular, he has a tendency not to really ask me questions out of curiosity, but questions that are more like interrogations, basically putting a thermometer in the water to test, to see if I'm going to have the right answer, the correct answer by his standards. So for him, he has a very orthodox political philosophy. So if I express anything that isn't 100% supportive of everything and anything that Israel does, then he that just doesn't register with him. I must be one of he based on even a hesitation to answer the correct way in his mind. I may as well be one of the campus protesters who are anti-Semitic, regardless of the fact that I'm Jewish and I have family in Israel. It's a test. For the purposes of this conversation, he'd be part of the committed partisan right. So there's really only one way to answer that. Now, there are others though that I have very close relationships with, who in fact did participate in the campus protests. I was watching an interview about 2 weeks ago where the interview, again, it wasn't really a journalistic interview. It was pretty disgusting to me. The interviewer it was somebody who has a pretty big YouTube platform, and they were interviewing the senator from Michigan, one of the two senators from Michigan. I thought the senator was doing a great job. In fact, I'm going to look her name up because I made this mistake when I was talking to Thomas Chatterton Williams from Michigan. Yeah, Alyssa Slotkin. So she was talking to Alyssa Slotkin, and the interviewer clearly sees everything that's happening in Israel, what Israel is doing in Gaza as genocide, and sees Israel a certain way, that they're engaging in effect in the same thing that white Europeans engaged in South Africa. Again, I'm going to apartheid, that they see Israel as an apartheid state, that was the only moral, ethical, and the interviewer actually used the words moral several times. I viewed it as sort of a moral chauvinism, that they weren't necessarily asking out of curiosity and open to the possibility that this can be a really complex issue. But there was a purity test that if you didn't name what's happening in Gaza as genocide, and if you didn't call a Israel an apartheid, the equivalent of apartheid, the way South Africa was had apartheid as a standing policy for decades, then you were part of the problem. That you were a villain. That so that's problematic. That's problematic. Either my friend at the breakfast I went to, who was interrogating me, looking for an orthodoxy to be 100% in support of everything and anything that Israel did, as well as the interviewer who was interviewing Senator Slotkin looking for a purity test. Basically, if you didn't say genocide, if you didn't say apartheid, then you were evil, you were a villain, you're part of the problem, you're immoral, you're all these things. Now, there are a lot of people who hold space for all of the above. I mentioned that my cousins from Israel happen to be here, and we've it's been great. We've got to spend a lot of time with these folks. My family, my mishpacha or mishpacha in Yiddish. Mishpacha is Hebrew. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But you can hold space for a nuanced position. What's going on there is terrible. What happened on October 7th was an absolute pogrom. It was the worst slaughtering of Jewish people and Israelis since World War II. Terrible. Israel has every right to defend itself. I support Israel's right to exist. I support Jews having a homeland. I support. Full stop. Right. I can also say that the way that Netanyahu and a part of his government has executed this war is wrong, is immoral. We have seen precision strikes, like in Iran. We have seen precision strikes to the north with Hezbollah. We have seen precision operations that indicate that this war could have been conducted in a completely different way. So, do I defend Israel's right to exist? Of course, my family is there. This is my family. This is personal. But is also moral and ethical and political from a political philosophy standpoint that the Jewish people who have experienced centuries of hardship, of atrocities at the hands of other people groups and nations, that to have a homeland, a place to call home, especially after World War II, when we saw 6 million of our people slaughtered, that we defend the right for Israel to exist. This is something I don't have to waver from. We can also coexist with our Palestinian neighbors. I believe that as well. I also believe that the way that Netanyahu has conducted this war has, especially in Gaza, is worth being criticized at the very least. We can say all of these things at the same time. So, getting back to the point of this conversation, I'm not talking necessarily just about Israel Palestine. I'm talking about the committed partisan right, the progressive partisan left, and then a lot of us who are, call it in the middle, call it whatever you want, but there are a lot of us who can hold space for complex, hard issues and be able to, and want to be able to have conversations about complex, difficult issues. We can pick any number of things. I mean, I could pick any headline out of the hat right now. The Trump administration sending military into LA, where not too far from where I live, or now in DC. I think it has a lot more to do with distracting from the fact that he is a serial pedophile, and distracting from the Jeffrey Epstein case, which he is. It seems the headlines are finally, focused on something other than Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files. So to a degree, I guess he's successful. But when it comes to military occupation of Washington, D.C., or military occupation of any American city, I think that those who are trying to say that crime does not exist, or any number of other things that say crime has gone down, it starts to cite trends and start to explain it away that carjackings don't happen, theft doesn't happen, murders don't happen, crime in general doesn't happen. If you're explaining, you're losing, right? At the same time, we can also say Trump's administration doesn't need to send the military into LA. Trump's administration doesn't need to send the military into DC. They're doing more harm than good. You could say both at the same time. You could say that there's a crime problem in major American cities, which, by the way, the crime problem in cities in red states is actually much worse. So we can have that conversation too. We could talk about crime. But I'm telling my friends who are on the committed, partisan, progressive left that you're making a mistake if you're saying that crime isn't a problem. You're making a mistake if you're saying crime in major cities isn't a problem. We can have the conversation. Just say, yeah, it's a problem. And here's some ways that we can deal with it. That's a good conversation to have. But I'm also saying to my friends who are committed partisan right that anything that actually, you know what? A lot of my friends who are on the committed partisan right, they're not so much enamored with. Some of them are. Some of them are just big old Trump supporters. But a majority of people that I know that have had extensive conversations with, it has more to do with an aversion, a hatred of the left or their perception of the left. And to the degree that I don't hate the left enough, that I don't hate Democrats enough, the Democrat Party enough, to the degree that I don't express enough hatred, I am considered to be part of the left. That's a mistake too. That's false too. That's just flat out fucking stupid. I'm tired of it. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I'm tired of it. So me not adapting the talking points that the Trump administration has put out through Fox News, which is an extension, let's face it, it's an extension of the Trump administration. So me not regurgitating the talking points of Fox News and the Trump administration doesn't mean that I'm part of the progressive committed left. It means that I'm an independent thinker. It could mean that I'm an independent thinker. In my case, it does mean that I'm and a lot of my friends, 43% of us in this country, 43% are not the 28% that are committed partisan right and not the 27 or 28% committed progressive left. So I can say that, yes, crime is a problem in major cities, including in red states, by the way. In fact, it's a worse problem statistically speaking. But, you know, when you get into statistics, you get into explaining, and when you're explaining, you're losing. So I'll leave that to the side for right now. But but I'm also going to tell my friends that are on part of the progressive left that if you're explaining, you're losing. If you're trying to explain away that no crime doesn't exist, you're losing. I'll grant you that, yes, Trump sending troops it's a problem. It's a huge problem. I agree it's a problem. And there's a reason he's doing it. And he's successfully distracting from Jeffrey Epstein and the fact that he's a serial pedophile. I get it. I understand. That's part of the conversation too. But don't lead with, no, there's not really a problem with crime. So you could do both at the same time. There's 43% of us that are either just disengaged and sick and tired of being sick and tired of all this nonsense. So we just disengage, or we can hold complex views about any given issue. I was having many conversations over the last couple of weeks about redistricting. What Texas is doing is wrong. Yes, legally they can do it. Legally they can do it. It's not written into their state constitution that they can't redo it. But it's still an important norm that's being broken to do this mid-decade. You can say that. Now, if you say that to some of my friends who are part of the committed partisan right, what are you talking about? Maryland did this, Illinois did. If they're somewhat informed, they'll talk about all the blue states that cheated. And, because again, what it comes down to, a majority of my friends who are part of the committed partisan right, it's about a hatred for the left. They wake up every day. The left is so bad. The liberals this, the Democrat Party that. That's their entire political worldview. They wake up and they say, the left is so evil. The left is so bad. The libs are so stupid. The Democrat Party, it's a hatred of all things left, liberal, progressive, Democrat, whatever. That's the compass by which they set their political views every day. And there's plenty of feedback. There's a feedback loop for it too. It's not just Fox News. It's OANN. It's Newsmax. It's, a universe of an entire ecosystem of podcasts that is a very successful business model that feeds this sense of grievance, feeds this sense of malice, that feeds this sense of anger and hatred and fear. Fear that the left is trying to take your children and kill your children and take over this country and turn this country into left Marxist concentration, like whatever. Did you pick a three-word slogan, and Charlie Kirk and Mark Levin and Matt Walsh are going to run with it for a week. It's a very successful business model, and it works for a lot of reasons, But there are 43% of us that are tired, that are disengaged, that are disgusted, some are just uninformed because it's not of interest. We need to get the kids to soccer practice. We need to figure out how to go to church. We need to, get to work. There's a lot of other things that are on our mind that keep us sane as opposed to all this stuff. But then there's others of us, I would say about 9% of us, of that 43%, it's, you separate the leaners this way and that way, and there's about 9%, a little less than 10% of us total out of the entire country that really are engaged, but we are not partisan, entirely partisan one way or the other, and are truly independent thinkers as well as independent voters. So how do you have these conversations? For candidly, I'm venting right now, so I'm not doing a great job of it. I probably wouldn't enter in. I'd probably try to, take a bunch deeper. If this is how I was feeling entering into a conversation with somebody who's part of the committed partisan right or the progressive partisan left, I'd probably take a bunch of deep breaths or maybe just talk about something else that day. Because I've had a few of these conversations and the frustration is building up. So I have to be aware of that. But there are other things, there are ways to enter into these conversations. Understanding where people are coming from, what motivates different people, what primary psychological drivers there are. A lot of my friends who are either Trump supporters or, it should just be hate the left party or some combination thereof. There is that sense of grievance. There is a sense of victimhood, an us versus them mentality, an insider versus outsider mentality, which is why they're open to populist messaging and combative style, the way that Trump has been exhibiting for the last however many years. There's a desire for more order, for tradition, for strength, for patriotism, for economic security. And by the way, that's a part that my friends who were on the left, whether they're activists or part of campaigns or just very politically engaged that are on the left, are missing. That you can make it about issues that are important to you, whether that has to do with reducing inequality or concern for social justice or institutional reform to address to address these inequities at the expense of historically marginalized groups. I get it. I understand. But those messages may be important to you, but they're not. They're not. Bottom line, they're not what is important to the people who are actually deciding the elections. So there's a choice that needs to be made. And now I'm talking to my friends who are part of the progressive left. There's a choice to be made. You can continue pounding the drum of issues that you're passionate about and be passionate. I'm not saying that there's no merit to these problems, but they're not winning you elections. Also, the way that these messages are being driven to folks that are outside of that circle, that 27 or 28% of progressive partisan left, is doing you more harm than good. An insistence on an orthodoxy in terms of the language that we use, in terms of the way that we think, that people outside of the core, progressive left are thinking, they're doing you more harm than good. I'm telling you, what's going to win elections in 26 and 2028, what's going to win elections in 2026 and 2028 has to do with cost of living, has to do with inflation, has to do with jobs, has to do with economic issues. That's what it's that's what these the people who are actually going to come out to vote and the people who might have voted one way in 2024 and might vote a different way in 2026, they will some may change their vote from having voted largely red in 2024 to voting a different way, say for a Democratic US House candidate in 2026. A lot of the folks who are open to changing their vote from voting for a Republican in 2024 at the top of the ticket to voting for a Democrat, actually coming out in the first place in 2026, let alone voting for a Democrat for U.S. House or Senate in 2026. Those folks are going to be much more driven by cost of living issues, by economic issues, by jobs, by issues that aren't at the top of the list of people who are crafting campaigns for a lot of the candidates on the left and a lot of the messaging and a lot of the media, a lot of the broadcasts, and a lot of the podcasts that are on the left. It's still, about inequities. It's still about racial justice, social justice. It's still about abortion and women's rights. And these things are all worth having conversations about. But whether you like it or not, that is not what is going to move a voter from the red column to the blue column, let alone motivate a voter who might not otherwise come out in 2026. So there are a lot of these things to have conversations about. Now, what is this show about? This show is about talking politics and religion without killing each other. So a few do's and don'ts. Like I said, my frustration is peaked right now. So if I'd probably either talk about something else if I was going into a conversation with somebody, or I'd certainly do a lot of like just deep breathing and reel in my expectations, calm down, go in with a different temperament, but go in with the goal of connecting rather than convincing, and determine in advance what I wanted to get out of the conversation, or at least adjust my expectations, and anticipate how I might react. Say, if somebody, when I do start if somebody asks me about Israel, if somebody asks me about redistricting, if somebody asks me about any one of these issues where I see a complex picture, and anticipate how I might react if I get cut off and I get labeled a certain way by either partisan left or partisan right, friends from either side, and try to give myself a little bit of a bank account, an emotional bank account, if you will, to anticipate that and allow for that, and then give myself tools to either redirect the conversation, or rehearse ways of asking my interlocutor, the conversation partner, my friends, neighbor, family member, hey, you've tended to cut me off in the past, and I'm going to ask that you give me an opportunity to express a more complex view, than how you're categorizing me. I might also say, listen, you've had a tendency to label me a certain way, and your labeling isn't productive for a number of reasons. Number one is because I resent it, regardless of whether you think it's true or not. But two is it's really not true. You see, and then to try to explain that, like, the person is seeing things through their own lens, through their own partisan lens. But there's a whole bunch of us who are not partisan one way or the other. The world is not black and white. The world is not Democrat or Republican. The world is 28% Republican, 27 or 28% Democrat, partisan left, and a lot of people that are independent, truly independent. So you can see I'm rehearsing that conversation in my head. Things that I'm going to avoid. I'm going to try to avoid before the conversation. I'm going to try to avoid planning to prove a point or change the other person's mind. I'm also going to try to enter into the conversation when the time is right and the situation is right, when we have time to relax a little bit and have a more extensive conversation. When it is more one-on-one or maybe three people max, I usually won't enter into a conversation where it's a whole bunch of people. Like even that table that I was at where there was three guys who were all Trump supporters and then just me, that was a little bit too much. If there were just two guys for the length of the conversation, I might have had a chance. But three on one, not a good situation. Because three on one, if I am not completely aligned with all of their views, they see me as an either or, as opposed to seeing that there are folks who are 180 degrees off of how they see things, but there's a universe of people who see things in a more complex way. But I didn't have a chance at that table because it was three on one. They saw me as the other one, as the other side, right? I'm also going to try to avoid. Now, I made them. I was going to say I also try to avoid using polarizing language or personal attacks. And I made this mistake just recently. There was a fellow that I know from a business group that he. I referred to him a couple weeks ago. He decided to pipe up on an article that our friend Mike Madrid wrote without having read the article. Or maybe he did read the article, but he had a lot to say about the title of the article. So you could tell in my chuckling that I didn't take his comments very seriously, and that showed through in my comments. So I do try to avoid using dismissive, a dismissive tone or a mocking tone. It really isn't productive. Now, you don't have to pretend that somebody's making a serious point when they're not. If somebody's making an argument for a flat Earth, I don't need to take that seriously. But I'm going to try to find something serious about the person. Not that their argument needs to be taken seriously, because sometimes candidly, it's just not worthy of being taken seriously. But you can take the person seriously. I went on a long walk with my wife, and I was talking about this fella who he just got on my nerves, commenting, had so much to say about the title of Mike Madrid's piece. And then he was kind of using personal attacks about Mike and being dismissive about Mike. I'm like, dude, like you can't, well, he did. It's kind of like Leo Mazzoni, the great baseball coach, pitching coach of the Atlanta Braves through the 90s and into the early 2000s. If some schmuck who happened to watch a ball game here and there, or maybe highlights on ESPN, decided that they're an expert on pitching, decided to critique Leo Mazzoni, that's kind of the equivalent of what this guy was doing. And not only that, it was also the equivalent of him calling him, I don't know, a football coach, because he was referring to Mike as, he referred to him as my lib friend. I'm like, dude, he ran the freaking Republican Party. He got, the last statewide Republican elected in California. Like, just stop. So you could tell, I did have this mocking tone, not a great way to enter into that conversation. But my wife reminded me, like, hey, this dude's a human being. He's got his troubles. He's got whatever is on his mind. He's got his life story. Maybe you touched a nerve for him. So I did write back to him. I'm like, hey, man, the way I approached you wasn't, my best self. So let me buy you a beer. So I'm not sitting here saying that I do it 100% great all the time. I more often than not, I don't do it great, and I'm trying to learn from how I messed it up. Like this time, I just didn't treat him seriously. I was kind of mocking him, and I could see how that fed into his sense of grievance. It furthered his sense of grievance, regardless of the merits of the point that he was making. I guess my point is, you still don't need to take sometimes you don't need to take their argument seriously, but you can take them seriously. And then sometimes you got to know when to walk away. So you don't have to feel compelled to continue a conversation that just isn't going anywhere. There are some folks that aren't open to the conversation. So, gosh, I threw a lot at you today. Like I said, the bottom line of what I wanted to talk about is those three general categories of voters, three general categories of people, and how to talk to each person in each category. I'm making a case. If I'm making a case for anything and anyone, I'm making a case for the 43% of us that are in the middle. And I know that of the 43%, a lot of people end up leaning right or leaning left. As much as I don't prefer the right and left analogy anymore, but it's the closest thing we have to describe, generally speaking, committed partisan right, progressive partisan left. And I understand of the 43% in the middle that a lot of folks lean right and left, but there's still a good chunk of us, about 9% of us, that really are independent. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And what I wanted to exhort my friends who are part of the committed partisan right and progressive partisan left, that if I express that to my friends on the right, if I express that Netanyahu has not conducted this war in a moral way, I do not have to support every action of the Netanyahu government while still supporting Israel's right to exist, my family's right to have a place called home. I can have a complex view without you labeling me and putting me and the 43% of us in the other bucket. I don't belong in the other bucket. And a lot of folks don't belong in that side, the other side, them. So that's the argument that I'm making. And I'm hoping that we can remind ourselves of ways to enter into these conversations that can be more productive, to enter in with the expectation of a conversation rather than a contest, to enter in with the goal of connecting and not convincing. And to prioritize the relationship and prioritize listening to understand as opposed to waiting to respond or fight back. That we can remember to not go in with the agenda to prove a point or to change the other person's mind, as well as to not start a conversation when the conditions aren't great, when the conditions are stacked against you, to not use polarizing language or personal attacks, or make sweeping generalizations, or for the left to go down the road of using academic jargon, but to avoid overly intellectualizing and connect on a human level. And again, last but not least, don't feel compelled to continue a conversation that has hit a dead end. Whether it's you're not connecting with the person, whether it just got too heated and you just have to take a break, whether you have to love that person from far away. I'm going to love you, but I'm going to love you from a safe distance kind of a thing, like I've talked about before. So those are all the things that come to mind. Three buckets of people: partisan right, partisan left, progressive left, committed right. But a lot of us are in the middle. And for those who are on the left and the right, leave some space for more complexity, more nuance in all of these conversations. Just because we don't agree with your particular orthodoxy doesn't mean we're part of the other side. And frankly, even if we're not the enemy. We're all neighbors. We all got to live in this land together. And that's what I'm going to leave you with today. As always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write that review, and now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. That's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan, at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan, on all the socials, including Substack. Oh, by the way, politicsandreligion.us, that's our main website. I've gotten away from that, but that's where you can, our main website for the podcast, Politics and Religion, just like YouTube, youtube.com/@politicsandreligion, politicsandreligion.us that's our Podbean. And we're on all the apps. You could find us there, but talk politics and religion without killing each other. Sometimes it's hard to start spelling out. So politicsandreligion.us is an easy way to find the podcast. And I do have those links in the show notes. Listen, your support really does help. It really does make a difference. So thank you for all of it. Thank you for putting up with me today. No, I came on a bit of a heater. So I guess I'm going to tell myself that I need to talk about politics and religion with gentleness and respect. And I need to have a great week. And I wish you a great week as well.